The city was in ruins. Towers that once stood tall, symbols of power and civilization, were now nothing but shattered remains, their steel skeletons barely holding together. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating, carrying the scent of death. Fires raged in the distance, crackling hungrily as they consumed whatever remained of the once great metropolis. The sky, once clear and filled with the lights of the city, was now darkened by the wreckage of fallen warships, their broken pieces floating like ghosts above the battlefield. Through the chaos, the Zyran shock troopers moved like predators, their black armor gleaming under the fiery glow of destruction. They were ruthless, executing any survivors they found. Their orders were clear: no mercy, no prisoners. The war was over. The enemy had lost. Now it was time to erase them completely. Hiding beneath a collapsed structure, Celia struggled to stay conscious. Blood dripped from the deep wound on her side, staining her once pristine combat suit. Pain throbbed through her body with every breath. She had been betrayed by her own squad, left to die when she refused to carry out the brutal execution orders. She had watched in horror as her fellow rebels, those who had once fought beside her, were gunned down one by one. And now she was alone. Through the cracks in the rubble, she saw them. Zyran soldiers systematically hunting down the last survivors. One of them, a towering brute with red markings on his armor, scanned the area with cold, calculating eyes. His rifle hummed softly, primed and ready to fire. She held her breath as he turned toward her hiding spot. Her heart pounded. Had he seen her? The Zyran took a step closer, then another. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at her position. And then, boom! A massive explosion erupted just meters away, sending debris and fire into the air. The Zyran soldier was thrown off balance, crashing against a broken pillar. More explosions followed, shaking the ground, lighting up the night like fireworks of destruction. Out of the smoke, a figure emerged. He moved like a ghost, his body cloaked in shimmering light, bending reality around him. In one swift motion, he raised his rifle, not Zyran tech, something sleeker, deadlier, and fired. A precise, controlled burst of plasma rounds ripped through the Zyran's armor. The enemy barely had time to react before he collapsed, lifeless. Celia could only stare. A human. He moved quickly, eliminating the remaining Zyran soldiers with brutal efficiency. His rifle hummed with intelligence, adjusting its aim in real time, anticipating movements before the enemy even made them. A tactical genius. A predator. For a moment, Celia forgot her pain. She had heard stories about humans, how they were nothing but weak, primitive creatures, barely worthy of being noticed by the great galactic empires. And yet, here he was. Fast, efficient, unpredictable. His visor glowed red as he scanned the area, ensuring no threats remained. Then, to her shock, he turned to her. Instead of aiming his weapon, he crouched down beside her. "You're still alive," he muttered, his voice distorted slightly through his helmet. Not the voice of a conqueror. The voice of a soldier. Celia tried to move, but pain surged through her body. She groaned, her vision blurring. Why was he helping her? What was a human even doing here? His gloved hand reached for a device on his belt, and before she could protest, a small drone hovered over her, scanning her wounds. The human soldier pulled out a med pack, injecting something into her arm. Immediately, the pain dulled, her body stabilizing. "Why? Help me," she managed to whisper. The human soldier looked at her for a moment before replying. "Because we don't leave people behind." Before she could process his words, an alarm blared in the distance. The Zyran reinforcements were coming. The human glanced toward the incoming enemy forces, his visor flashing. "We need to move." He grabbed her, pulling her onto his back with ease. Celia was too weak to resist. He activated something on his wrist console, and suddenly they'd vanished. Or at least, that's what it looked like. His cloaking device activated, bending light around them. To any outside observer, they had disappeared. As he carried her through the ruins, Celia couldn't help but feel something strange. Hope. For the first time, in a long time, she wasn't alone. They wove through the battlefield, avoiding drones, scanning for survivors, dodging enemy patrols, and slipping past Zyran enforcers like ghosts. The human's movements were precise, calculated. He was not just a soldier, he was a survivor. They took shelter inside a destroyed resistance bunker, its walls riddled with plasma burns and shattered metal. He set her down carefully, checking his rifle. Celia's breathing was steady now. The human had saved her life. "Who are you?" she finally asked. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a scared but determined face, his short brown hair damp with sweat. "Lieutenant James Carter, Earth's 3rd Recon Division." Celia frowned. Earth? She had heard the name before, but it was never spoken with respect. The Zyran Empire had always dismissed humans as insignificant, a young species with no real power. And yet, this man had just wiped out an entire squad of elite Zyran troopers. "Why are you here?" she asked, still struggling to understand. James leaned against the wall, reloading his weapon. "Because your people made a mistake," he said simply. "They thought humans were weak. They thought they could wipe us out." He looked at her, his dark eyes unshaken. They were wrong. Before Celia could respond, a distant explosion shook the ground. James's visor lit up as he scanned the surroundings. Zyran forces were closing in. "This isn't over," he muttered, gripping his weapon. He turned to Celia. "Can you fight?" She hesitated, then pushed herself up, pain still lingering but now manageable. She grabbed a fallen Zyran rifle and checked its charge. "I can fight." James smirked. Good. The enemy was coming. The Zyran Empire thought they had won. But tonight, they would learn the truth. Humans never went down without a fight. James didn't hesitate. His movements were precise, efficient. Years of battlefield experience had trained him to act first, question later. He knelt beside Celia, his fingers moving quickly as he pulled out a nano-med kit from his tactical belt. The small device hummed to life, scanning her wounds and injecting microscopic nanobots into her system. These bots would work fast, repairing tissue, stopping the bleeding, and stabilizing her condition. Celia barely stirred, her breaths shallow, her body trembling from the pain. She had already accepted death. Her people had left her behind, betrayed her. Why should she believe that this strange human, an enemy, would be any different? Her lips moved, barely forming words. "Why? Help me." James didn't even look up as he continued his work. "Because we don't leave people behind." His voice was steady, firm, like this was a universal truth. As if it didn't matter that she was an alien, that their people had been at war. He spoke like this was simply what humans did. Celia's eyes fluttered, trying to focus on his face. Was it possible? Could it be true? Before she could process it, a sharp alarm blared in the distance. James's visor flashed red with an incoming warning. The Zyran forces were closing in. They had detected the explosion. More troops would be here soon, along with combat drones. James's grip tightened around his rifle. They needed to move. Now. He lifted Celia onto his back effortlessly, securing her in place with one arm, while his other hand hovered over his wrist console. A soft hum filled the air as his cloaking device activated. In an instant, they vanished. Or at least, that's what it looked like. To the outside world, they blended perfectly into the ruins, light bending around them, making them nearly invisible. James moved fast, his steps silent, weaving through the broken cityscape. The Zyran soldiers were methodical, sweeping the area, their rifles glowing with deadly energy. James knew better than to engage. One wrong move, one sound, and they'd be dead. Drones hovered above, their scanning beams sweeping across the battlefield, searching for any sign of survivors. James crouched low, pressing himself and Celia against the remains of a collapsed wall. One of the drones drifted closer, too close. James's mind raced. He couldn't shoot it, not without alerting the soldiers. And if it detected them, it was over. He took a risk. Slowly, carefully, he extended his free hand toward the drone, his wrist console flashing as he accessed his hacking module. A quick bypass of the Zyran security encryption. A dangerous move, one that could backfire instantly. The drone shuddered midair. Its red scanning light flickered, then turned blue. James had done it. With a few more keystrokes, he turned the drone against its own masters. The machine whirled in place, then suddenly shot forward, targeting the Zyran patrol. Before they could react, a blast of energy tore through them. The ambush was swift, brutal. The drone had become their executioner. James didn't stop to admire his work. He sprinted forward, still cloaked, slipping past the chaos. They needed cover, a safe place, somewhere to regroup. Then he saw it, a destroyed resistance bunker. It had been hit hard, its entrance barely standing, but its underground levels might still be intact. If they could get inside, they'd have a fighting chance. James pushed forward, dodging more patrols, carefully avoiding security checkpoints. Finally, they reached the bunker. James kicked open the half-buried hatch, carrying Celia inside. He descended down the ruined staircase, scanning the area for any threats. It was dark, the air thick with dust, and the scent of burnt metal. He placed Celia down gently on an old medical table, her breathing still ragged but improving. "We should be safe here for now," he murmured, his eyes scanning the bunker for supplies. Celia's eyes slowly opened, her gaze locked onto James. Her voice was weak, but there was something in it, a quiet strength. "You risked your life. For me." James sat down against the wall, checking his rifle. He shrugged. "That's what we do." Celia looked at him for a long moment, her mind racing. Her people had called humans weak, primitive, but this man had just saved her. And she wasn't sure why. But she was starting to believe everything she had been told about humans was a lie. The bunker was silent except for the faint hum of old machines struggling to stay active. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows across the cracked metal floor. James moved quickly, scanning the small room for supplies. They needed weapons, medical gear, anything that could keep them alive. Celia lay on the cold table, her breathing steadier now, though her body was still weak. The nanobots had stopped the bleeding, but her energy was drained. She turned her head slightly, watching as James worked with practiced efficiency. "You're not like the others," she murmured, her voice hoarse. James glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "Others?" Celia hesitated, then sighed. "Humans. We were taught that you're reckless, fragile, no match for the Zyran Empire." James smirked, his fingers tightening around a makeshift bandage as he wrapped it around her arm. "Yeah. And what do you think now?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, with a weak chuckle, she whispered, "I think they were wrong." James's expression softened. He finished securing the bandage and sat back against the cold metal wall, stretching out his legs. "We've been underestimated for a long time. Aliens look at us and see a species that shouldn't have made it this far. But we don't fight like they do. We fight smarter, not harder." Celia turned her head fully now, staring at him. "Smarter and kinder." James shrugged. "That part depends on who you meet." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. After a while, Celia spoke again. "I wasn't strong enough for my people," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Zyran value power above all else. They see kindness as a weakness. I refuse to execute prisoners. I believe mercy had its place in war. But my own squad, they turned on me, left me to die." James listened, his expression unreadable. "Guess that makes two of us," he finally said. Celia frowned. "What do you mean?" James exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "My unit was ambushed. Most of my team didn't make it. Command thought we were all dead. I was left behind, just like you." She studied him, seeing something in his eyes, something familiar. "You kept fighting," she murmured. James nodded. "Because that's what we do." For the first time since she had been abandoned, Celia didn't feel alone. But the moment was short-lived. A sharp beeping sound shattered the silence. James's visor flashed red. A proximity alert. Celia's body tensed. "What is it?" James checked his wrist console, his jaw tightening. "They found us." A warning siren blared throughout the bunker as red emergency lights pulsed along the walls. A security monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy image of Zyran soldiers advancing toward their location. Celia forced herself to sit up, groaning in pain. How? James's mind worked fast. The cloaking device had hidden them from sight, but heat signatures were another story. "The nanobots in your system," he realized. "They're repairing your body, generating heat. The Zyran must have picked up the thermal signature." Celia cursed under her breath. "Can you fight?" James's visor calculated the number of hostiles closing in. 10 heavily armed Zyran shock troopers. He checked his rifle. Only 3 plasma charges left. "Fight," James muttered, a smirk playing at his lips. "Not exactly." Celia looked at him, confused. "Then what?" James locked eyes with her. "We improvise." James worked fast, his fingers moving with precision as he rigged the bunker into a death trap. Every wire, every explosive charge, every piece of tech had to be perfect. If they wanted to survive the incoming Zyran assault, they needed every advantage possible. Celia, still weak but regaining strength, watched him with growing curiosity. The Zyran Empire relied on overwhelming force and superior technology. But this human, he was unpredictable. "You're planning something," she muttered, shifting her weight as she pushed herself up. James smirked, setting up another trap. "That's what we humans do. We make do with what we have." The bunker was small, too small to hold off an army. But James had turned battlefields into graves with far less. He placed plasma charges along the entrances, rigged motion sensors to detonate explosives, and stacked debris in ways that would create deadly bottlenecks. Celia winced as she tried to stand. Her wounds were healing, but her body was still weak. "I can fight." James glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I won't be a liability." Before James could respond, the ground trembled. They both turned toward the bunker's entrance. The sound of Zyran boots marching in unison echoed through the ruins above them. Then came the metallic clanking of drones hovering in formation. The Zyran had arrived. James exhaled slowly. Showtime. A loud explosion rocked the bunker entrance as the first Zyran soldier tripped a proximity mine. Fire and shrapnel burst outward, sending bodies flying. The enemy didn't hesitate. More stormed in, their energy rifles glowing with charged plasma rounds. James moved like a phantom. He weaved between the debris, using the shadows to his advantage. The first soldier who stepped too close never saw the attack coming. James grabbed him, twisted his rifle upward, and fired a plasma shot straight into his own faceplate. Celia gasped as James used the soldier's collapsing body as cover, then whipped around and fired 3 precise shots. The plasma bolts hit their marks, dropping 2 more Zyran instantly. The bunker erupted into chaos. Celia grabbed a fallen rifle. She had never fought like this before, never with such desperation, such reckless intensity. But the human had shown her something. He had saved her. And now, she would fight beside him. A Zyran charged at her, energy blade humming to life. Celia sidestepped, raising her rifle, but she wasn't fast enough. James was. He grabbed the Zyran's arm, twisting it with inhuman speed, and drove his knife deep into the alien's exposed neck joint. Celia stared in shock as James turned to her. "You okay?" She blinked, gripping her rifle tighter. "I will be." More Zyran poured in, their heavy armor making them look unstoppable. James grabbed a plasma grenade, tossed it into a cluster of enemies, and dived behind cover just as the explosion ripped through the bunker. But the Zyren weren't slowing down. James cursed. They were running out of time. A drone locked onto him, its targeting system flashing red. Before it could fire, James activated his EMP pulse. A wave of blue energy pulsed outward. The drone's lights flickered and died. Zyren weapons malfunctioned. Shields dropped. But James felt his own systems short out. His cloaking device was fried. His visor flickered, struggling to reboot. Damn it. Celia saw what happened. Without his tech, he was vulnerable. Azurin took advantage of the moment, charging at James with a plasma blade raised high. Celia didn't think. She moved. She raised her rifle, aimed, and fired. The Zyren fell before he could strike. James turned to her, surprised. "You fight smarter, not harder," Celia said, breathing heavily. "I learned from the best." The bunker trembled violently. The ceiling began to crack. The battle was tearing the structure apart. James grabbed Celia's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "We have to move." Just as they reached the tunnel entrance, the bunker began to collapse. A massive chunk of metal fell between them and the remaining Zyren. They were trapped inside. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from deep within the ruins above them, a low, distant rumbling filled the air. Celia's eyes widened. James tightened his grip on his rifle. Something big was coming. The ground trembled beneath them. A deep, distant roar filled the air, like the sky itself was tearing apart. Dust and rubble cascaded from the collapsed bunker's ceiling as Celia and James steadied themselves. Celia's sharp hearing picked up a strange hum, one she had never encountered before. It wasn't the harsh, mechanical drone of Zyren warships. It was something different, something powerful. James exhaled, a slow grin forming despite the pain lacing his body. "That's our ride." Before Celia could ask what he meant, the entire battlefield outside was consumed in fire. A brilliant blue beam shot from the heavens, slicing through the Zyren front lines like a blade through paper. The very air crackled as massive explosions followed, engulfing Zyren war machines in devastating shockwaves. Then she saw it, a behemoth of metal and power descending through the clouds. A massive human warship, unlike anything she had ever seen, broke through the smoky atmosphere. Its colossal cannons roared, bombarding enemy forces with relentless firepower. Every shot was precise, every strike calculated. Celia stood frozen, eyes wide. This wasn't just war. This was annihilation. The Zyren had always spoken of humans as an inferior race, weak, unworthy of true conquest. And yet, here they were, tearing through Zyren forces like they were nothing. James collapsed against a fallen metal beam, clutching his side. He was hurt, badly. Celia rushed to him. "Stay with me." James chuckled, wincing, not planning on dying just yet. The ground shuddered again as drop pods screamed down from orbit, slamming into the earth like meteor strikes. The heavy doors hissed open, and human Marines poured out, their rifles blazing. The Zyren, caught between the orbital assault and the advancing human soldiers, fell into chaos. They were being slaughtered. A Zyren commander, his dark armor gleaming under the burning sky, barked orders into his communicator. His forces were failing. He knew it. Without hesitation, he turned and ran. Celia's heart pounded. She had been abandoned, left to die, betrayed by her own people. James had saved her, and now she had a choice. She picked up her rifle. She wouldn't run. The Zyren commander sprinted through the wreckage, leaping over burning debris, dodging bodies of his fallen soldiers. His escape ship was close. He could still make it. But then, a single plasma shot tore through his leg. He collapsed, snarling in pain. Slow, measured footsteps approached him. Celia stepped into view, rifle raised. The Zyren commander looked up, rage flickering in his eyes. "You're a traitor," he spat. "You side with these." These humans. Celia's grip tightened. The Zyran had abandoned her, left her for dead. James had saved her. She pulled the trigger. A single, final shot ended him. The battlefield was still ablaze, but the Zyran forces had been broken. The warship above shifted position, ceasing its bombardment. The battle was won. Celia turned back, watching as human soldiers lifted James onto a medical transport. He looked at her, offering a weak but genuine smile. "You coming?" he asked. Celia hesitated. Her own people had betrayed her. But the humans, they had fought for her. They had saved her. She took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward. She had made her choice. The cold metal of the warship's interior was a stark contrast to the burning battlefield Celia had just left behind. The scent of smoke and death still clung to her, but here, aboard the massive human vessel, there was a strange sense of safety. She had never been on a human ship before. Everything was different, sleek yet functional, built for war, but not without comfort. She sat on the edge of a medical bed, her wounds already treated with advanced human technology. Small nanobots worked to repair her burned skin, closing deep gashes with efficiency that even Zyran medicine couldn't match. Humans were more advanced than she had been led to believe. Across the room, James Carter lay on a medical pod, his armor removed, revealing deep bruises and a bleeding wound on his side. His face was pale but alive. His fellow soldiers had taken him in immediately, treating him as one of their own. The same people who had once been called weak by her kind had just shattered an entire Zyran battalion in a matter of minutes. The humans had won. Celia had seen strength before. She had witnessed war, betrayal, and death. But what she saw in humanity was something different: resilience, unity, and an unwavering will to fight for each other. James groaned as he sat up slightly, a grin spreading across his lips. "You look like you're thinking too hard." She frowned. "Your people, you fight differently." James chuckled, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. "Yeah, we do." He looked at her, his expression growing more serious. "I know what you're thinking. What happens now?" Celia took a deep breath. She had spent her entire life believing the Zyran Empire was the strongest force in the galaxy. The humans were nothing but a primitive species, barely worth conquering. But now, after seeing them fight, after watching them, risked their lives to save their own. Even a stranger like her. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. James leaned forward slightly, ignoring the protest of his wounds. "You have a choice, Celia." His voice was steady, despite his injuries. "We can drop you off somewhere safe. You can go back to your people, if that's what you want." Her hands curled into fists. "My people left me to die." James nodded, as if he already knew what her answer would be. "Then stay." She met his gaze, surprised at how simple he made it sound. "You saw what we're capable of," he continued. "We fight for each other, for what's right. If you want, you can fight with us." Celia's heart pounded. She had never been given a choice before. She had always been told what to do, who to kill, what to believe. But now, for the first time in her life, she could decide her own fate. The war wasn't over. The Zyran Empire would strike back, and they would never forgive her for siding with the enemy. If she stayed, she would be turning her back on everything she had once known. And yet, she thought of James, of the way he had carried her through the battlefield, risking his own life for hers without hesitation. She thought of the human soldiers who had fought so fiercely, not for conquest, but for survival, for each other. A slow, determined smile crossed her lips. "I want to fight." James smirked. "Knew you'd say that." Celia glanced out the viewing port, watching as the massive human warship moved through the stars, its engines glowing like a beacon in the darkness. She had made her choice. She would stand with humanity. She would fight for a better future.